What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Reformed Reader, the channel where we review different forms of media through the lens of a Christian who is under the authority of the Scriptures. My name is Josh, and today we're going to be doing a book review of Orphan X by Greg Hurwitz. Now, before we jump into the review, let's go over what is this book about. The Nowhere Man is a legendary figure spoken about only in whispers. It's said that when he's reached by the truly desperate and deserving, he can and will do anything to protect and save them. But he's not just a legend. Evan Smoke is a man with skills, resources, and a personal mission to help those with nowhere else to turn. He's also a man with a dangerous past. Pulled from a foster home by the U.S. government when he was a boy, he was raised and trained to be part of a covert operation designed to create the perfect assassins, the Orphan program. He was Orphan X. Years later, Evan broke with the program, using everything he learned to disappear, leaving his past behind. Or so he thinks. Now, someone is on his trail, someone who is getting closer and closer, and will exploit Evan's weakness, his work as the Nowhere Man, to find him and eliminate him. Okay, guys, so I'm back with a temporary recording space, and so let's jump into Orphan X. Now, for those of you who are new to the channel and don't know how my reviews work, I go over the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good being the things about the book that I enjoyed, the bad being the things that I didn't like so much, and these are preferential things, maybe setting, writing style, whatever. But then I go into the ugly, which is what could be some sin that is steeped into the work that might hold a Christian back from reading it. And I break that down into 5 categories and rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. So let's jump into the good. What were some things that I enjoyed about this book? I really enjoyed that it was a change of pace. I really enjoyed being able to get out of fantasy for a little while and read something that is more of a thriller and a mystery, which is not really my forte, or at least I'm not well versed in it. Because normally I stick to fantasy and sci-fi because that's what I'm comfortable with. It's what I enjoy reading. But a large part of it is that I don't read a lot of those kinds of books. And so because of that, I haven't gravitated towards picking one up. Well, some friends of mine recommended that I start reaching out into some different genres, and I'm glad that they did, because this book, it was like reading a Jason Bourne book. In my full review that I put on Instagram, I actually think that I described this as Jason Bourne if he had Batman's budget. In the book, we follow Evan, who has unlimited wealth, but is using it to help save people that are in desperate need. Imagine Jason Bourne, but instead of being chased, he is the pursuer. He is pursuing the villains. That's what this book is about. It's got a really neat premise. It is super fast paced. And so if you like the Jason Bourne movies, you're really going to enjoy this. There's quite a bit in here to like. Greg Hurwitz did a good job of being able to write nuance into such a flat character. And what I mean by that is he's been trained for years and years and years to have no emotion at all, to have no response, emotional response to certain situations at all. And so it's interesting to see how Greg Hurwitz is able to write these different types of nuance into the character. So our main character is really great, but more than that, it's watching him interact with everybody else around him. It's watching him have to interact with people who are very emotional, or in situations that are obviously going to spark a lot of emotion or rise out of our side characters. So that was really cool. The setting, the pacing, more than anything, the pacing, the flashbacks, all that was really cool. But getting to find out sort of this trickle of information of who Evan is and how he came to be the way that he is. Excellent, excellent. Now, this was a fantastic book one. I think that you could read this book, put it down, and be perfectly satisfied, but there's still plenty of story to tell. So what did I like? A lot of it, most of it. There's quite a bit in here that I did enjoy. And so that leads me into the bad. What were some things about this book that I didn't care so much about? There wasn't really a lot. As far as preferential things go, I thought it was very well executed. I don't think there's hardly anything in here that I marked as a negative as far as preferential things. Now, there are things in here that I wish weren't, but we'll get into that in a minute. But there wasn't really a lot in this book that I would mark as bad or things that I didn't prefer. I thought it was really, really well done. But this does lead me into the ugly. And so what I mean by the ugly is what could be some sin that is steeped into the work that might hold a Christian back. And unfortunately, there is quite a bit. So if you guys are new, I break this section down into 5 categories and rate them out of 10, 10 being the most severe, starting with violence and brutality. Violence and brutality, I gave a 7. Now, the reason for this is because, like I said, it's like you're following Batman meets Jason Bourne. And so there's a lot of hand-to-hand combat. You're dealing with assassins. You're dealing with assassins versus assassins. You're dealing with murder, espionage, all these different types of plotting. And there's a lot of close quarters combat. So I gave this a 7 because there's quite a bit of violence and there is some brutal aspects of the book, but mainly it leans more into the violence side and less so the brutality. The reason I gave it a 7 out of 10 is because that's what I would rate the Jason Bourne movies, is about a 7 out of 10 as well, as far as violence and brutality goes. And so that's why I marked this a 7. So this leads me into category 2, which is sexually explicit content. I gave this a 3. Now, the reason I gave this a 3 is because there are allusions to sexually explicit content or things like sexual assault, those types of things where Evan is having to deal with characters that are facing these kinds of circumstances. So I don't really want to get too into that. I don't want to get too graphic into that, but just use your imagination. These are people that have reached rock bottom in numerous ways, and they're calling out to him for help, for him to come and rescue them. And so some of these situations are explained in depth, and some of these situations involve vulnerable women. So just know that going into it. And so this leads me into the third category, which is language. Now, language, I gave a 5. Now, I gave it a flat 5 because there is some heavy hitters in here, but for the most part, the language in the book is pretty tame. I would say this is probably PG-13. There's a couple, like I said, there's a couple of heavy hitters in here. I may even want to bump it up into a 6 or a 7 at its most extreme. And so I would say for you, the viewer, approach with caution, because if you want zero heavy language in your books, this probably is not the book for you, because there are some in here for numerous reasons. The circumstances that our character, who is a trained assassin, is placed in and is then having to converse with some of his marks, they get pretty heated at times. So know that going into it, because there is some heavy language. So I think maybe I'll redact that statement and say I'll push this up to a 7 just to be on the safe side for you guys. Some heavy hitters, they're kind of few and far between, but for the most part, the language is fairly tame. So I would say at its peak, it's at a 7, but for the most part, it's sitting at around a 3. Now, this leads me into gratuitous inclusions. And what I mean by this is there diversity and inclusion steeped into this book for the sake of it being diverse or inclusive, not because it adds to the story whatsoever or anything like that? And I gave this a 0. And the reason is because it's not in there. I didn't find it present in there whatsoever. We do have a diverse cast, but it's because you're dealing with a diverse group of people. For instance, Evan lives in this apartment complex, basically, and it's a large apartment complex, and the different tenants vary greatly. And I really appreciated that because it helped me make a distinction between them. So I would say that this is not gratuitous in nature. It is not, overtly inclusive in nature. I think Greg Hurwitz just sought out to write a good story about these assassins, and I think that he hit the mark there. So gratuitous inclusions, I gave an absolute 0. And then this leads me into the final category, which is dark themes. Now, dark themes, what I mean by this one's a little more vague. Most of the time I'm talking about things in sort of in the spiritual realm, or like that are spiritual in nature. But I also want to talk about heavy themes. And so if I'm talking about heavy themes included with dark themes, I'm going to give this like a 7 or an 8. I'm probably going to give this an 8. And the reason is because some of the victims that Evan is coming in to save are really facing and suffering some horrible circumstances. So, for instance, early on in the book, he comes to rescue a young teenage girl, and her 11-year-old sister that are dealing with somebody that is trafficking them. And so just know, like, if that kind of shocks you, it goes into more detail than that. Now, it doesn't go into gratuitous detail, in my opinion, but I do think that it is heavy, and it's supposed to be. It's supposed to make you squirm. It's supposed to make you cringe. It's supposed to make you loathe these individuals that are doing these things to them. And so, since that is his intent, he definitely manages to do that. But just know that these things are discussed. So there are a lot of adult topics discussed in this book. Things like not just explicit things, but things like murder, torture, things like that. And they pull the curtain back a little bit on these things. And so even some of the descriptors of how Evan is able to dispatch some of his enemies, it can really make you uncomfortable at times. So I'm going to say, as far as dark themes, meaning heavier themes in this case, it's going to be pretty high. So that's why I gave it an 8, because there are some heavy themes in here that are going to sit heavy on you. And so I don't recommend picking this book up and reading one chapter right before bed. And the reason is because normally the chapters end on some cliffhangers for the most part. And a lot of times those cliffhangers are where our characters are in very dire situations. So I say that just to try to warn you ahead of time and say, yeah, maybe you don't want to go to bed with this being the last thing on your mind. And so this leads me to the final question, which is, would I recommend this to a Christian? And unfortunately, the answer is probably not. Now, here's why. I loved this book. I think I gave this 5 stars. It was exactly what I was looking for at that time. However, I jumped into book 2 and I had to DNF the series. There were some heavy same-sex topics talked about in book 2, and I mean very explicit and very descriptive language used to express this relationship. And so I, in good conscience, could not continue, so I put book 2 down, which really stinks because I definitely could have seen how much I was going to love this series, to the extent of I had actually purchased quite a bit of the books and I'm now having to offload them. So I would say it really depends. And what I mean by that is, I think that you, the reader, could read book 1 and stop there and be satisfied. It would be like watching The Bourne Identity, because that kind of ends open-ended. So this does too. And so if you're satisfied with that type of an ending, I think that you could read book 1 and be perfectly fine and put it down and not have to pick up book 2. However, if you pick up book 1 and you really enjoy it to the extent of where you're going to pick up book 2, I don't want to be the reason why you pick up this series. So I would say probably not. Unfortunately, I can't recommend this series to most Christians. I probably couldn't even recommend it to most Christians without the inclusion of book 2. I do think there's an audience here. I do think the people that love the Jason Bourne movies or Batman, especially the newest Batman movie with Robert Pattinson, if you guys like that, I think you'll really enjoy this, because it does tend to be on the darker side with our vigilante overcoming evil, but then having to wrestle with that internally. But again, I don't want to be the reason why somebody picks this series up and supports this work, because after reading book 2, and I got about 40% into it, after reading through that much, I felt very uncomfortable and convicted and had to put it down. So that was a real bummer. So would I recommend this to a Christian? Probably not. Am I telling you not to read it? No. All I'm doing is I'm telling you what my experience was with this book and this series. And as far as I'm concerned, I loved book 1. I even read the little novella between books 1 and 2, and it leaned heavier on some of the heavy themes, but it was still fantastic. And then we jump into book 2, and then we get those types of inclusion, and I just don't want to be entertained by those things anymore. And so let me kind of clarify here that as of late, I have really been convicted about the entertainment that I consume, about being too flippant with certain sin that is being promoted into works. And I know everybody thinks that it's just, same-sex stuff. It isn't. It's there's been a lot of things that I've had to purge as of late, as far as my music taste, as far as the TV shows and movies that I watch. And so maybe I'm being a little more harsh than some people would, but what I find hilarious is that if I tell people about this book and I'm sort of on the fence, I'll have one person comment and say, hey, I don't think anybody has anything to worry about. Everybody can read this book. And then on the same video, I'll have somebody else that says, I can't believe that you wouldn't just absolutely condemn this book. And so, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle for the most part. But I would say, just if you do want to approach this novel, maybe do so with caution. Maybe do so with, if it were me, if it's just me talking to you, I would say, if that sounds good to you, if this premise sounds good to you, read book 1 and stop there, and you'll be perfectly fine. Read book 1, you'll have a good, fun time with it. I think I read it in like a day and a half. It was so good, super fast paced, and the chapters are very short, which I appreciate. But I would say that if it's just you and I would say, please do not push on, because I think that it could be detrimental to us as Christians to continue to consume this type of content, because over time we will become desensitized to sin and the promotion of sin. And so I think that, just to err on the side of caution, I would say no. But if you can read book 1 and put it down without jumping into anything else, yeah, maybe find a copy at the library if you don't have anything else, and pick it up, and I think maybe you'll have a good time with it. So overall, I really enjoyed the book, and I was super bummed that I had to put book 2 down. But again, it is what it is. It's just entertainment. It's not that big of a deal to me to have to put something down sometimes. But yeah, I had a good time with it while I was reading it. So if you guys have read this book and you enjoyed it, let me know down in the comment section below. If you guys are interested in anything else about this book, if you have any specific questions, please feel free to leave a comment, and I will get to it as soon as possible. I try to answer every comment that is on my videos. So if you have a question, if you're still kind of on the fence and you want to know certain things, just reach out to me down in the comment section below, and I'm happy to respond to you. But guys, other than that, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I will see you on the next one.